I'll put the microphone on and we'll start again. Good evening. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Winchester Health and Environment Policy Committee taking place in the Walton Suite at the Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30. My name is Jerry Pett. I'm a Winchester City Councillor, chair of this committee. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. Please can I ask everybody to ensure that mobile phones are on silent or switched off entirely. In the unlikely event of a fire alarm and it's necessary to evacuate the building, please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public who are joining us this evening and visiting councillors? I would invite you forward when it's your turn to make a contribution. So now turning to the agenda, you'll notice that we arranged for the World Cup to take a night off, so there's no distraction from that. And Mr. Ferry has already won his Wimbledon match in straight sets, so we have no distractions. Apologies, and deputy members, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence receiving Councillor Warwick with Councillor Langford-Smith deputising. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, any declarations of interest? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I think I should declare that I'm a trustee at WINAC, and when and if any issues come up that relate to WINAC's business, I will obviously act accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
And I'm a volunteer director at Unit 12, which is a previously recipient of SIL funding, but I think it's a non-prejudicial interest to discuss the paper.
Okay, thank you. And other than that, I must declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of several items on the agenda due to being a member of the South Downs National Park Authority. But as there's no material conflict of interest, I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer that enables me to speak and vote on those matters if necessary. Okay, item 3 on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chairperson for the new municipal year. Do we have any nominations? Councillor Power.
Would I nominate Councillor Brophy, please, Chairman?
You certainly may, thank you. Do we have any seconders for Councillor Brophy's nomination?
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Ackles, thank you very much indeed. Any other nominations? In the absence of which, Councillor Brophy, that would seem you are re-elected to the Deputy Chair. I have to say that the only reason there's a little distance between people up here is you'll hear my voice is slightly croaky, so I wouldn't mind if you decided you wanted to move further that way as well, but it's up to you. Okay, Chair's announcements. In this time of LGR preparation and uncertainty, you'll see that there aren't any policy papers before us this evening, so it's very much a matter of we have 3 substantive items and 1 update that are really for information, but on which we're invited to make our views known to the officers and debate as necessary. So I would say there isn't an opportunity this evening to make up any new policy as such, so please bear that in mind as we go through, and hopefully it will be a very informative evening. The 3 papers of substance, 1 on management of water, which is really a peek into what's rather an unsung task here in the city. 1 on nutrient neutrality, and which is an update on progress of upgrading some of our plants, and the 3rd one on SIL. I suspect there will be quite a few views on that one. Okay, item 4 is to note the dates and times of future meetings of this committee, which are on your agenda paper, so I'm not going to read them out. Item 6 is to go through the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 25th of February, which you will have the chance to read and peruse. Do we have any comments on those minutes? Failing which, Are we all agreed on those minutes? Thank you very much indeed. Item 7 on the agenda then is public participation, and we do have several public speakers this evening. First up, Joe Crocker from WINAC, who wishes to speak on the climate and nature emergency. I think you're probably an old hand at this, Joe, so you know which button to press, as it were, and away you go.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am Joe Crocker from Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis, WINAC. WINAC was set up almost 20 years ago as a mechanism for local communities to act alongside the local authorities on the climate crisis. So we've been reflecting on how we need to respond to local government reorganisation with the change to a mid-Hants unitary incorporating the City Council. Mindful that this is the context within which the work of this committee and the whole council sits, I wanted to share our thoughts with you. I'm interested to know if you think we're taking the right approach. I'm also hoping that you agree with us and that our thinking can contribute to yours. Local government reorganisation will take a lot of time and attention. Officers and members need to be confident that services are ready and that the budget balances. Some are services that the City Council already provides, like refuse collection. Others are new, like children and adult services. None of that is easy. We are concerned, though, that the urgency of making sure that all these services are safe and legal may risk climate work being perceived as an extra or luxury rather than relevant to all aspects of life. The City Council, as you know, has a good reputation for its work on the climate. Examples are the local plan's high climate standards for new buildings, the rate of approval for solar farms, and WeCan. We are worried that these and other good work might be lost. So this means, one, making sure that where the merging district councils have good practice, good policies and good projects already in place, they're not lost but are used to inform the new unitary council. We want the new authority to level up, not level down on climate action, helping community groups like WINAC, but also in other districts to continue good work already in hand and to share it more widely across the new unitary footprint. So I'm here today to ask you three things. One, that Winchester City Council pledges to make climate a key priority in its planning for the new unitary, because that will be good for health, economy, energy security, skills and the environment, basically a resilient, thriving place. Secondly, that WINAC works alongside your officers and those of other district councils that will be in the new unitary to develop a climate change strategy and action plan for implementation by the shadow unitary. This should include where the unitary will press for the combined county authority to make climate central to all its strategies and policies, as well as health in all policies. The combined authority should adopt climate in all policies. And thirdly, that the City Council works with WINAC to develop a model of community involvement in collaboration with the other district councils and the other community climate groups to ensure that we take the opportunities of local government reorganisation to extend good practice and lose none of our collective achievement. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. And I would hope you're pushing at an open door with that, but thank you for your contribution. And secondly, we have Mr. Ian Tate.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak. As someone who's very concerned about air pollution and climate change, I've always been very supportive of any proposals for a last mile logistics hub for Winchester. Last December, a planning application from Decarbon Logistics Solutions was approved. In October 25, just prior to the construction of the logistics hub, Councillor Lerney, Cabinet Member for Climate and Nature Emergency, said the parcel delivery hub project is an exciting step towards making our air less polluted and our roads less congested, while still ensuring residents and businesses can efficiently receive deliveries. Trialling better ways of moving goods in the city centre is one of the ways we can go greener faster and help shape a healthier and more sustainable Winchester. In response to Councillor Lerney's remarks, a local resident and sustainable transport expert, David Mundy of Cycle Works Hubs, raised his concerns, saying, "I've run an operation like this in Southampton and Winchester for over 3 years. The margins were paper thin to a point of being negative, as all the volume players only want to pay gig economy rates. I shut the business after 3 years. My risk, my money, lesson learned. I advised Solent Future Transport Zone, the City Council and Hampshire County on this and suggested a warehouse rental or use one of the many disused county or city locations, Bar End Depot, the old council car park, the old railway sheds, all on the outskirts of the cities where lorries could drop off without causing congestion in the one-way system and be back out on the A roads or motorway network very quickly, appealing to logistics couriers. This could all be done at a much reduced cost compared to this half-baked, costly, short-term box-ticking suggestion. I chose not to bid as this proposal gave a rent-free period but no commitment for the council to use the service, so no revenue, and you need to establish a profitable business. Future Transport Zone have poured £9 million into playing with drones and many millions into the app, which was discontinued. Winchester badly needs a solution to the pollution congesting vans in the city. There are many solutions. This isn't one, a waste of taxpayers' money. No one took any serious note of David Mundy's concerns. The hub was then constructed. It was finished in March this year. It was never used. 3 months later, not 12 months trial, 3 months later, it was taken away. What lessons were learned from this utter fiasco? And has anyone spoken to David Mundy to apologise? It's rubbish. No press release from Councillor Lerney. What are the lessons learned, Chair? And for someone who breathes in those fumes every single day, I would have loved to have seen it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. That's a really interesting piece to hear, and I will certainly note and pass on. So thank you for that. Okay. Item 8 on our agenda is the Nutrient Neutrality Working Group update. And you'll recall, members of the committee, that we set up 2 members' working groups last municipal year, one on nutrient neutrality and the other on what was it? E-charging. Thank you, charging, the word I was looking for. E-charging facilities. The nutrient neutrality paper was passed to the 2 relevant portfolio holders back in March. And I regret to say that we've heard nothing from the portfolio holders since then, but Councillor Porter, thank you very much indeed, is with us this evening. And so hopefully we'll be able to give us a reaction to that paper now. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And there is a reaction in the sense that there's a paper coming up forward later on in the agenda tonight. So I think that we have taken on board, some of the comments that have been made, but also very conscious that this was done without officers there. So it's a little difficult to tie up this exactly with the paper that's coming along, but it certainly they do. And I think the paper answers many of your concerns. My understanding is really that you wanted us to make nutrient reduction a core nature recovery objective. And in a way, this ties up with what Joe's just been talking about from WINAC. And you've also made the point tonight that this isn't about changing our policies, but changing perhaps the way in which we think about these things. And certainly nutrient reduction is a nature recovery objective for us. And we deliver that by the paper that you're going to see and hear about later on. It's one of the arms of the nature recovery objectives that we have. The second one is to develop, you've talked about, is developing schemes to upgrade old private sewerage systems. And I'll just go back to that in a little while. And then the third one is to align nutrient mitigation and monitoring charges and policies, really, between planning authorities. And I can honestly say we have tried very hard to do that. And I know that you've had practical experience of trying to do that. The National Park charges a very different rate from the rate that's being charged by us. And actually different authorities right across the country are charging different amounts of money. Some are taking the risk that we won't be doing anything for them in 100 years, and others are taking the risk or not taking the risk and expecting to cover some of the costs in years to come. Going back to the developing schemes to upgrade old private systems, because nutrient reduction is a core nature recovery objective for us, we are actually already assess each of the the small treatment plants that we have to discuss and decide which ones take priority. So that's already being done. The second part is really that the majority of our older housing and our housing in general with private plants is actually privately owned. We have limited capacity at the City Council to do something about that. So it makes sense to tackle the ones we can tackle first. Private properties do have a regulatory responsibility in their own way. It's a shame that the register of private treatment plants and septic tanks was abandoned probably about over a decade ago now. I think it was partly because of the lobbying from CLU and other landowning associations. As a result of that, it has now become something that Natural England has not taken up in any of their legislation. So it's up to the EA really to be taking a stronger line if they wish to do so. We don't have any arm to do that as part of our work, really. So I would say that that's an interesting point, and perhaps there's a piece of work that could be done through scrutiny to look at how that could become part of the legislative process. All that we can do at Winchester is to make sure that the plants in within our bailiwick are managed well, and that we have a very clear project to do that, but also that our new developments address nutrient neutrality, which we do. Absolutely. We reject planning applications unless that nutrient neutrality is proved. So I do understand why you want to see more, but I also say that we have got a very clear project plan that's deliverable, and it's deliverable and can actually bring forward housing, not just for us, but housing within our requirement, which we are required to do, but it's also done in a nutrient neutral way.
Thank you very much. I think, yes, you're absolutely right. One of the thrusts of this paper was that we thought that nutrient neutrality has largely been seen through the lens of planning and the need for a planning enabler for nutrient neutrality. Whereas I think we were trying to shift people's thinking to see that nutrient neutrality is part of the nature emergency in itself, and particularly the enormous number of private plants that are around, that, as you say, that scheme to register them sort of went into abeyance, didn't it? And we got, as you've read, we got some data from Portsmouth Water for just one village in Ground Protection Zone 1, and an astonishing figure of, I think, 270 private plants, many of which we suspect are very old, probably very leaky, and not doing anything at all for the eutrophication, or rather doing a lot for the eutrophication of the solvent, but not doing anything to prevent it. So it was that mindset change that we were hoping to effect. But I do take a point in time that we are limited, or as a council, as an authority, the authority is limited to what it can actually achieve. And we have got that paper presentation coming up later this evening where we'll cover that. But just for now, does anybody want to have a question of Councillor Porter on that? Councillor Lee.
Councillor Porter, I hope you're staying for the next item, are you? I'll save my question to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, yeah.
Can I just say that there has been quite a lot of education done by various different, I was going to say, ecologically sound groups on educating people, informing people, and making sure that they understand it's their responsibility. If it's their private home, it's their responsibility to make sure that that does not pollute the ground. And I think that there is more to do from the Environment Agency and from all of those groups to keep going to get to a wider audience, so that it's not just a few people that see that, but everybody is part of the conversations we have. And the EA could be very, very active in that part of that.
Yes, I think it's very true to say there's a lot more for the Environment Agency to do. Yes, in the round. Councillor Lee.
Sorry, that your comments, they just prompted a concern with the Planning Infrastructure Act and the implications for existing mitigation schemes. We seem to be in a rather ambiguous position here. MHCLG is saying crack on, and yet there may be implications. What is the situation? When will we know? And I know you don't know. Yeah, I know you can't answer that.
I think that is a rhetorical question.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something that must surely put risk into whatever we're doing.
In the original project plan, we were very conscious of that work. When I was involved with planning when the original statement came out from the EA and the ruling came out, so it brought everything to a halt. There was a conversation of Grampian conditions and letting things go, but we all said no, we've got to get this right before we can give planning permission to a property. And as a result, we were all expecting there to be a much clearer mandate to all the water companies to reinstate the issue about private treatment plants. We're expecting that mandate to come out from government, but it hasn't. So I think we're here at a point waiting really for that. I don't know if the officers know any differently, but as far as I know, we were all expecting them to be enacted by 2032, and we thought we were on a deadline of 2032. That hasn't happened today.
Councillor Langford.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the nutrients leaching from private plants. Is it something that we could allocate funding through SIL for? So put a certain amount aside, and the first X number of properties that apply, we can give a grant towards them upgrading their plants. Just a thought.
And a good thought. I think we got the numbers for Village of Droxford. You can almost be certain that there are similar numbers in many of the other villages in the Upper Meon Valley, the Upper Itchen Valley, and I think the numbers would be so great that we'd end up scratching the surface of it. But what I would say is that if we can consider that paper and the two presentations we're just about to have as a sort of prelude to a main event in September, at our September 17th meeting, when we certainly have Southern Water agreed to be with us, and we hope Portsmouth Water and Natural England, so that we can have a more substantive discussion on the basis of what we've learned from both our own paper and the two that follow now. And if we think of it in that spirit as sort of background prep, if you will, for that next meeting, I think that would be a really useful way of tackling it. Anybody else? In which case, thank you very much for your input on that one, Councillor Porter. And we'll move on to item 8, which is the update from the Special Maintenance and Natural Environment and Recreation team. That's a hell of a mouthful to say, Campbell. thank you for your paper, which I think you can assume that we have all read with great interest. But if you want to give us a few minutes now of sort of background and amplification of that, yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pett. Yes, so I think this sets out, as you mentioned, you've got a meeting coming up with Southern Water later on in the year. And this is really setting out what we do at the moment so that the committee is aware of what we do and the significant roles we play in water management in Winchester. There are others who obviously have their own roles, the Environment Agency, Southern Water, Hampshire County Council. But this really sets out, and I'm assuming, again, aiming for the basis that you've read this, but poses a couple of questions, I think, for you to potentially consider, related to whether you think, for example, in terms of public awareness and community resilience, there's more we can do to improve residents' understanding of flood risks, whether from our recent experience of flooding events, are there any lessons learned you can identify and roll out to further strengthen our operational responses? And thirdly, looking at how a lot of we do in rivers, and we manage most of the main rivers in Winchester City Centre, whether it's removing shopping trolleys from the river or monitoring the levels every day, a lot of that goes unseen. So are there opportunities to better communicate that and really increase the public understanding of the services that we do? So that's it from me, and I'm happy to listen into the debate and the questions and help out where I can.
Okay, thank you. Certainly from my perspective, this is a sort of window onto a world that I knew very little about in terms of how much you actually do, you and your team do 365 to ensure Winchester's safe from flooding, or as safe as it can be from flooding. So yeah, I was really impressed at the scope of what he's done. I think it would be very useful if one of your team perhaps could work up some sort of graphic that just shows on one side of A4 the scope of the number of channels you actually control or have control over, and therefore the scope of what you do for the city. Because I think you're absolutely right, it's something that very few people are as aware of as they should be, and it would be really useful to get that out in the public domain. First of all, do we have any questions of what Campbell's got in the paper? Oh, I do beg your pardon. I do beg your pardon. You're absolutely right. My fault entirely. Councillor Wallace, you are down here. My apologies for not bringing you on first.
Thought you were waiting for the right time, Chair. That's all good. Yeah, good evening all. Yeah, it's, like you, I welcome this briefing note, an opportunity to discuss water management, which is one of the most important environmental issues facing our district. The report helpfully explains the range of responsibilities shared between Winchester City Council, Hampshire County Council, the Environment Agency and Southern Water. Also highlights a considerable amount of work undertaken by officers in managing rivers levels, wastewater treatment works, flood infrastructure and the planning process. Much of this work I know takes place behind closed doors and isn't seen by residents, so it is much appreciated. However, I would suggest there's two important areas where future reporting could be strengthened. Firstly, the report tells us a great deal about activities and responsibilities, but relatively little about outcomes. For example, we are told about nutrient mitigation schemes, wastewater treatment upgrades, catchment partnerships and water quality monitoring. We are also told that these activities are intended to reduce nutrient pollution, protect our chalk streams and support sustainable development. What is less clear is whether river health is actually improving, what the impact actually is. I would therefore encourage the council to include a small suite of outcome measures in future reports. These might include indicators such as nutrient levels, pollution incidents, ecological status, river flow monitoring results, or other measures that help members and residents understand whether conditions in our rivers are moving in the right direction. I do appreciate you've got limited resources, but it would be a useful gap to fill. Secondly, whilst this report is presented as an overview of how Winchester City Council manages water across the district, many of the examples focus on Winchester City itself and the River Itchen. Of course, Itchen is hugely important, but Winchester District is blessed with a number of significant river catchments, including the Meon, Hamble, Wallington and Test, all of which face their own environmental and water management challenges. Similarly, whilst fluvial flooding in Winchester is rightly discussed, many rural communities are particularly vulnerable to groundwater flooding. Indeed, some parts of the district, particularly in the Meon Valley, are amongst the most groundwater flood prone areas in Hampshire. I think Hambledon ranks #1 in all of Hampshire for groundwater flooding when it was assessed, and the Upper Meon Valley ranks #3, just to name a couple of them. So, great work, really good to see a report in it, but yeah, like I said, going forward, I'd really like to see greater focus on outcomes rather than activities and a broader reflection of the water management challenges facing communities across the entire Winchester district. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Apologies for not calling you up earlier. Councillor Adams, have as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Maybe we'll be retreading slightly damp ground because some of the comments from Councillor Porter and Update actually had quite a lot of relevance. But I just want to touch on wastewater treatment and sewage treatment plants in particular. I note the contents of the report as regards those that we operate 45, which is actually more than I had thought. But these plants are really in predominantly rural areas, and they're an important community service. I'm glad that we provide that. I think we do so effectively. These plants and systems are, even if they're not particularly large, they are complex and delicate in their operation. I think it's a major risk factor in rural communities generally, wastewater disposal. We have had some particular challenges around the plant at Mitchell-Dever, which is close to the River Dever. So particularly where we are close to waterways that are again themselves delicate, and I'm grateful to officers who've assisted with some of the local residents who are rightly holding us to a high standard in terms of what we're discharging, and we've worked to improve reed beds and things there. So I think this is an area which, as has been said, it probably isn't appreciated just how much effort and work is required for the management of these sites. More broadly, I think the risk for wastewater disposal is enormous in rural areas. And it's interesting to hear what you said about Denmead, the number of plants. And in my own small village, we've had 3 developments of around about 40 houses each over the course of the last various points over the last 30 years, all of which have had some sort of issues, and 2 have had very major issues with wastewater treatment plants. I think that really it's a bit scandalous how some of this has been approached in the past in the planning process, where no means drainage sewage treatment plant will be provided. Okay, great, next what? And then these treatment plants get hands off to resident management companies, 2 or 3 volunteer directors, and the agent has perhaps been put in who have no experience of them, and you're dealing with a very complex system and complex regulatory requirements around that. And we've had residents who really struggled, huge financial impacts on small development through management committees, etc. I think that particular scale of plants does really demand attention. If you're talking about 2 or 3 houses or your own, then that's one thing. But you're talking about trying to manage a system that serves 50 people through a management company. And I do wonder, just food for thought going forward to the future as we look towards unitary council, what more can be done to support residents. It has been speculated and was touched on. Adoption of these plans, more support. Obviously, this isn't directly in the council's remit beyond the ones that we operate ourselves. But I do think we need to give some thought to how these sort of plants and water treatment in sort of moderate scale developments in rural areas are managed. I have raised it with Southern Water as well, but I think we owe it to residents to think about how we can approach it better so that people don't end up left in the lurch, as quite a lot of developments here and elsewhere have ended up being over recent years. So that was what I was saying.
Okay, thank you. And that sort of carries over to our next presentation as well. So we'll keep that in mind when we get onto that. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so just focusing on the management of water, and particularly management of water in the city. Can I ask you, Carol, two quick questions? Firstly, how it is that the city council have this responsibility within the city centre? And secondly, who has responsibility for groundwater flooding effects outside the city? And then I'll open it up for others too.
So the split of legislative responsibilities, which we look after compared to the Environment Agency, compared to Hampshire Highways or Hampshire County Council at the moment, that's a legislative position. So there are main rivers, and the County Council is the lead local flood authority, which is a position it holds, and we work with them. But at the moment, taking on board your point earlier, I can produce a graph or a chart setting out the rivers we look after. But essentially, it's between Winnell Moors and Winchester College. We look after most of the rivers in those areas.
But is that just historic, or would it be the same in, if we went to Chichester or Chester or whatever?
The interesting thing about Hampshire and Winchester in particular is that we're on chalk, and because of the history of the river and its management, there are lots and lots of channels within Winchester which really don't exist in other places. In most other places, there's a big river which goes through the middle of them. We've got lots and lots of little channels which have been managed over literally thousands of years, and have evolved like that. So we've got a role in those, managing those, where other local authorities wouldn't necessarily have that. And that's one of the reasons we've got a special maintenance team who look after the rivers, whereas others don't, because of that sort of historical position. One of the other parts of having so much chalk is that what tends not to happen in Hampshire is we tend not to get fluvial flooding. We will get some surface water flooding, and there's some issues around surface water flooding you have seen on the main street in Winchester. But actually, the more significant issues are when the groundwater level rises. And for example, there's a link at the back of the paper or the briefing note which I did, which you can follow to go to a site which shows all the boreholes which are across Testanich and catchment, which will show you the water level and how high the water level is now today compared to the highest it's ever been. And these are the sorts of things in terms of making this information available, which we're working with others on to really support people becoming aware of the risks in their area. We don't have a huge role in terms of groundwater flooding, except when it's one of our housing properties, or if it's one of our housing properties, and we don't give out sandbags to people when it happens, except if there is no other route for them, or it's one of our properties again. So our role is quite limited, but we work with the other partners through the lead local flood authority at Hampshire to try and raise awareness of where it's happening and to reduce the likelihood of it happening. I think Councillor Wallace mentioned Hambledon, and there was a significant groundwater flooding situation in 2014. And as a result of that, there was a big groundwater treatment scheme in Hambledon, which has now been put in place. But the groundwater, there are places in Winchester where when the groundwater goes up, it will get into the basements of properties. And if you look on some of the data attached in here, I know because it's not very far from where I live. For example, in Hursley, there's a water level at that point, and when the water level reaches that point, that's the lower levels of the cellars at the one end of the village, and when it gets to that end, it's the levels at the other end of the village. And you can see when it's likely to happen, and then you can manage your response accordingly. So we try to work with others within our legislative responsibility.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I wouldn't want anybody to go away from this meeting thinking that water management is all special maintenance do. As far as I can work out, the world would collapse if they didn't do, well, I make them everywhere, Two questions on the paper, please. Page 17, you refer to looking after the water levels in Winchester. Does that include liaison with riparian owners up and downstream? And do you have a satisfactory mechanism for that? The second question is, you refer to working with the Meon Partnership and the East Hants Partnership. There's no mention there of the Test and Itching Partnership, and I would expect to see them as being involved with your work. Thank you, Chairman.
Phone, please. Sorry, we do work with riparian owners throughout the city to make sure that they're aware of where water levels are and how they're being managed. And I think we're comfortable at the moment with how that's done. Our head of engineering and transport can get hold of them very easily when we need to. So I think at the moment he's quite satisfied with our ability to contact them and liaise with the riparian owners in relation to flooding and water management.
I'm sorry, Chairman, but I meant rather further upstream. I've been on this council long enough to remember when we were looking at sacrificial flooding in Easton to protect the city mill. And that is a very different, that is the Test and Itching Partnership and the riparian owners further upstream. I'd like reassurance that we do have a channel of communication with them, please.
Yeah, I think so. I think we will work with anyone and everyone to try and sort this out. And that is indeed, you know, the solution which is becoming more common these days is not to build a channel through where the water is, but to store the water at the top of the catchment to prevent it, to attenuate its flooding as it comes down the channel. We've, for example, the Derngate flood defences, which we operate but haven't ever used, and that's been in place since 2021. We liaise with the Wildlife Trust there in relation to Winnell Moors, which is above that area. So we are in contact with them and we'll continue to be in contact with them. Right, I'll get there eventually. Yeah, so the example we've got in here is in East Hampshire, which is mainly the Meon, but as far as I'm aware, you know, that's an example rather than you know.
Sorry, can I just take that a little further? Do we have a seat on both East Hampshire Catchment Partnership and Test and Itching Partnership?
We do on the East Hampshire one. I couldn't confirm. I can confirm later if we do on the Test and Itching one, but I can't see any reason why we wouldn't.
Well, I would just see that as pretty fundamental to water management across the wider district.
Councillor, may I bring Sue, because this strands two teams. So Rick Smith, if I can bring you in there, please.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. Yes, that is all catchment partnerships we are keen to be on, and we've got representation on them. I think the one thing that we've had is a little bit of we haven't had much continuity in who's been attending. So that is something that I want to pick up now, and I want to attend those partnership meetings going forward. So yeah, it's very much on our agenda. Yeah, something I'd like to do.
Okay, I'm sort of hearing that it's an aspiration. I'm surprised that we've not had a seat on Test and Itching and East Hampshire for the last 10 years or so.
So I think in response to that, I think it's come to different people, as we can say now. It's coming it falls between different teams and different representatives, and I think there's been different officer involvement over that time. Because yeah, I mean, it would be great to have Campbell, Darren, myself, the ecologists, lots of people involved, and lots of sort of history, and it covers lots of different subjects. But I think that representation has just changed over time. I'd like to be definitely on all of those partnerships if possible. So yeah, that's what we aim to do.
Okay, can I just ask you to come back to us, perhaps so we can get something in the minutes, just updating us on reality of how we play into those.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. We'll do that, and we've got further updates down the line from our nature improvement plan and things. It all overlaps with that sort of thing, so we can build it into that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Tibby Cooper, then Councillor
Chair,
Lee, I'm about to.
Chair, if I may, on that
Yes.
point, what I'm hearing is we have a seat at the table. What officers are describing is putting some continuity as to who's sitting in the seat. But for confirmation, we have a seat at the table. If that makes sense, that's what
I think I'd just like a sort of few lines that confirms that and how we're going to manage that in future. That would be really useful. Councillor Tibby Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I sort of echo the astonishing work that the special maintenance team do, and I'll get to it in debate. But I've just done a quick skim of my mailbox on Copilot and found that Darren Lewis has helped me with 18 separate, different, varied water management related issues, and they are very varied. So I'll get to that in debate because it's quite interesting. A couple of quick questions and a quick point, if I may, slightly breaking the rules. But on the infographic that the chair mentioned at the beginning, I think it'd be really helpful for, in terms of a lessons learned point, and in terms of public understanding of who manages what in terms of flooding, to have some kind of quick reference point where people can go to and see who's responsible for what type of water management issue. Because always when there is a flooding issue, there's the questions bubble up on social media platforms elsewhere. Whose responsibility is this to deal with? And it'd be great just to point them at something that gives a quick one-stop shop answer to that. On the questions, Councillor Wallace made a really good point about the monitoring opportunities that there are for water management across the district, and I am aware of work that's happening in Test Valley around the Pan Parish River Pollution Forum and how they've basically got Southern Water to pay up for pollution monitors along their rivers that are in that area. And I wondered whether we could be pushing Southern Water for something similar, and what officers thought about that. That's question one. And then question two is around, the paper kind of alludes to the long-term risks and effect of climate change that our water management systems are subject to be strained under. And the question I have is do we have a long-term outline or business case or risk management plan for investment in our water management infrastructure, and whether that's going to be able to be sustainable over the next 20 or 30 years, given climate change? It's a question for the new local authority, I think, but just whether that's been thought about, and if so, what does that look like?
So I think that probably is, Chair, I think you're right. That's probably a question for the new local authority to think about. I think the major risk in Winchester was the Derngate flood defences, which is where the effort and the impetus went to and the funding through a shared partnership, which is a really good outcome. But I think with climate change and the change in how we're seeing water being used, hose pipe ban coming in, you look out the window, the weather's significantly different than it was 10 years ago. So I think that's absolutely a long-term plan is needed for the new authority. And I think where there are examples we can use some other people who've got funding and money out of Southern Water, I think that's a really helpful thing to take on board. Again, we don't necessarily have a responsibility for monitoring water quality, but I think where we can help generate more information and more data, that would be really helpful.
Could I just add to that? Yeah, thank you. Just on the climate change item, yeah, obviously very aware. We can't get away from that, at the moment, can we? But I think it's something that within the sustainability team, we are looking at adaptation and resilience and looking at risks and so on. So that's work that we are looking at, and that's that's flooding, but that's many issues, how these climate changes will feed in and impact us in flooding is one of them, but there's huge amounts on how we cool our homes and so on. So a lot of work going into that, and I think again something we take forward into the unitary as well.
Thank you. Excuse me. And I think probably the last question, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Tibby Cooper's still in most of my questions, actually. I think climate resilience and resilience planning is really important. And I would imagine it would make a lot of sense to have a plan, and presumably that's in one's mind's eye that we're considering given the risks. And I think the other point that was well made by Councillor Wallace is that a lot of what we're talking about is quite city focused. The district issues are very prominent. And you heard about some of the highest risks in the district. And then I think that plays into the other comments that were made about the east and west catchment and who sits on those boards, the cross-pollination of best standards, sharing best practice. It's the well heeled or well financed, or those are more successful in getting money to get their voluntary groups going. And so it's not a level playing field. And then my final point or question is, we talked about limited monitoring. I'm not sure what that means. What is the situation? What is the gap between the ideal level of monitoring that we should be having or considering and what we actually have at the moment? Thank you.
So in terms of monitoring, we are the sewage treatment works we operate are generally operated and monitored by the Environment Agency. Below a certain level, legally we have there is, because I think it's under 2 cubic meters a day of material produced, there aren't requirements to be monitored as regularly as it would be if it was a major sewage treatment works, for example. So they take a risk-based approach, which is, I think, a sensible one, bearing in mind the amount of resources which the Environment Agency have to monitor. And again, one of the links we put in here sets out the data which they publish online about where their water quality exists. And you can see the water quality and a number of different metrics for the different sites across the rivers, upstream and below stream of sewage treatment works. So, we also monitor our sites, which are above the legal requirement, and they operate really well, which is really good to know. And they've got effectively 24/7 monitoring. So if something breaks, we can see that happening and we can monitor. So that's really good. But again, there's a risk-based approach to that. If it's serving one house, we don't spend a lot of time looking at it. If it's 30 houses, it's a bit more. If it's 300 houses, it's more. So we take a risk-based approach to monitoring those within the parameters that the Environment Agency are setting for us.
Oh, sorry.
Just one more comment. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just looking again at the sort of climate change, adaptation, resilience. Just to reassure you that we are looking. We're working with all teams throughout the council, so we're looking at risks associated. We're not just focusing on our sustainability, natural environment, or our special maintenance teams. We're looking all the way across that. So that's work that's being undertaken, and looking towards a plan there. And then also, you raised the other question about the catchments again, and we're making sure we fill those seats with the right people, but we are already looking at they're very valuable and quite wide-ranging bits of advice and all sorts, and looking at potential for input onto some of our river management plans and things like this. We've mentioned before, I think, when we were talking about nature improvement plans, and that's the sort of thing again that we hope to create sort of an exemplar that we could use on a small stretch of river that we manage. How we can manage that, bringing in the aspects that Campbell's talked about with flooding and so on, but also biodiversity gain, health and well-being, all of these sort of things that we can cover in a management plan that we can then use to show other owners and so on what we can do.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy.
Just with regards to LGR and the role of the combined authority, a lot of our conversation today has been looking at the kind of I suppose the points of friction or the points of overlap between different organisations. The paper mentions that Hampshire controls 95% of the land drainage roles. So obviously Winchester's hands are tied, or you operate within specific lanes in many respects. Are there actually opportunities do you see coming down the line from the combined authority to improve some of this and also improve some of the partnership working? I suppose part of that is almost like, what's your wish list moving forward that we could be able to do better, which is another way of saying what you're doing badly. And I suppose the other side is with regards to the point you made about the chalk channels within Winchester, how do we protect some of the institutional knowledge and the legacy that the district council has moving into that combined authority?
Yeah, so I think, as has been mentioned, it would be great to have, and we've got some information on our website about who does what, but from a public point of view, you know, when we are a council rather than two different councils with two different responsibilities, that should make it much easier and clearer to know who to contact. And I think that's, you know, that's from my point of view. Across all the services I operate, I think one of the things that will happen is that the public should and businesses should have a better idea about who to contact, and it won't be any you say you do this, you say you do that. So I think, you know, from a flooding point of view, that position should become much clearer, which will be, you know, greatly beneficial, I think.
Okay, thank you. We haven't left ourselves a tremendous amount of time to debate, but if I may kick off with two very quick points. I know that water quality monitoring was mentioned earlier. Southern Water are paying for the Wessex Rivers Trust to do water quality monitoring at various points of the lower test, lower Itchen, rather, and the lower test, I think. That was reported to the Meon Partnership a few weeks ago. So that is now starting to happen. And secondly, on the groundwater, certainly in my part of the Upper Meon, the Environment Agency are quite proactive in winter, putting out regular bulletins, warning people of when the groundwater levels are rising, what their forecast is for individual boreholes within both the Upper Meon and I think the Upper Itchen as well. Yeah. Mr. Cooper.
Just to take the opportunity to say how excellent the special maintenance team are. They are, I think, probably the A team of the council. If you have a problem and no one else can help, you go to special maintenance, and they've been absolutely brilliant with all sorts of things to do with water management. And I've had help on things from removal of vegetation from the streams to advice around brown trout spawning, to removals of dead deer, to advice around dealing with flooding in parks and various other places. So the help that the special maintenance team have given over the time I've been a councillor, and including the last few months, has been absolutely fantastic, and huge credit to them for that. So I think part of the piece here is to get out to the public just how much work this council does in terms of making sure our water management is as effective as it is, because you've got some really brilliant people in the team, and I think we should be celebrating that.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Power, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, regarding data collection on water quality, although we don't have the Sonix, the constant monitoring equipment on the Itchen in the upper reaches, we do have many test sites, and that data is where sites are tested monthly. That's on EpiCollect, and it is in the public domain. So in regard to Councillor Wallace's question, where we should see a difference, it will take a long time, but we should be able to see a noticeable difference in improvement of the river quality. As regards flooding, I'm looking forward to it being a Mid-Hants Resilience Forum. I think, as Ms Williams said, that will make us far more robust and joined up, and I think that would be great. Now, the data from wastewater treatment plants, I did get a sample of this from special maintenance, and it's in terms of a lab report. I do not think the effort required to put that lab report each month on each plant into a spreadsheet and put it in the public domain is actually cost justified until we have made the difference. So where we've upgraded, we are showing that, we're showing it on the public website, and we are monitoring that, and you're getting a good deal of interest in that locally, and I refer people to it all the time. So part of it is done. But I think we should be celebrating more what we do, and especially the partnership working, which is so valuable, and relating to other riparian owners. We've got some really good forums in Winchester District. We need to be part of them and visibly part of them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to repeat a little bit of what I said before. The Winchester City flood management approach obviously could be seen as an exemplar model. There could be lessons learned. There'd be things there that need to be shared more widely across the district. And I wonder if there's a little bit of work that could be done to identify what those good things are and then make sure that they're understood and widely disseminated.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I'd just like to thank members for their acknowledgement of the work that the special maintenance team does, and rest assured it will be passed on. They were going to join us this evening, but unfortunately due to family commitments they can't be here, but we will make sure that that is passed on. And the second point was, I noticed quite a few members now have referred to the combined authority, and just to be clear, the combined authority, when we use that term as officers, that's referring to the mayoral authority, and the unitary council is what Mid Hampshire will be. So Mid Hampshire will be the unitary council and the combined authority will be the mayoral. I appreciate the vocabulary, but if we start that from day one, getting that right, they are two different things.
I believe we are mere legacy authorities. Correct, Sam? Yes. Okay. I think just to wrap that up then, thank you so much for the paper. There's clearly a tremendous amount of brilliant work going on there. I think what I'm picking up from around the table is it would be even better if we were to aspire to put together a slightly longer paper that actually sets out all the go-to points for groundwater flooding, city flooding, how we work with the catchment partnerships and so on. I realise that now is possibly not the time to do that, as everybody's so wrapped up in reorg, but I think that's something we should aspire to do in the fairly near future. But thank you very much indeed for that. And now let's move on then to the related paper, really, the nutrient mitigation programme and the update paper on that. Alex, are you leading off on this one, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll be introducing the paper on the nutrient mitigation programme. So nutrient mitigation programme is the Council's programme of mitigation solutions to reduce nutrient pollution and facilitate the delivery of new development in the district. The paper that we've shared today provides an overview of the Council's nutrient mitigation programme. It provides an update on the delivery progress across the various different strands. That includes the work that we're doing using HRA funding, our cost reduction programme, and also the work we're doing in partnership with Push to upgrade our wastewater treatment works. It also sets out the programme management, governance framework, and the key risks associated with that programme of works. And also there's a summary of emerging third-party nutrient mitigation schemes within the Winchester district that we're delivering in partnership with the Partnership for South Hampshire. The information shared in this report is also being put together to align with some of the points raised by the committee nutrient neutrality working group. So yeah, thank you for your contribution with that. And the key points for the committee to consider today are outlined on the first page. There are 4 points. The first one being a progress update on the council's wastewater treatment work upgrade projects, and that's across all 3 of the delivery strands. Second, the programme management and governance framework, including delivery timescales and current risks for the programme. The emerging third-party nutrient mitigation schemes, principally the Solent Householder Septic Tank Upgrades programme, which has recently been launched, and also the emerging Hinton Ampner Nutrient Mitigation Scheme. And then finally, touching on the role of the council as local planning authority in securing nutrient mitigation and monitoring.
Thank you for that. If I could get in with the first question then. Really good paper, really clear, although I know that people will have questions on sort of factual detail in a moment. But I do get the feeling that we're working obviously closely with Push, because that's what, where we're delivering credits to in part. Again, I see us acting as an LPA, slightly ignoring the park's role as an LPA in the greater good that nutrient mitigation does as part of the nature emergency for the whole of the district. I think it's too easy to split us up into the 2 LPAs and not take a more holistic view of the general good that is achieved by by reducing the amount of nutrients going into our rivers in the first place. So that's my question, I suppose. Should we have more of an emphasis, in your view, on reducing nutrients across the district, regardless of the planning consequence of that?
I think that's a really fair point to make, and that is something that drives our work in our programme. The council plan does have an objective to improve water quality, and that features heavily in our greener, faster objectives. That's the core strategic principle behind our programme. We've obviously got delivery challenges, and that's part of the reason why nutrient neutrality has come into the forefront. Evidencing nutrient neutrality is something that's required for new developments. There's clearly a need to meet that, and as an LPA we have a legal responsibility as competent authority to make sure that mitigation is being secured correctly by developers. Then we do have that delivery side of it. We recognise that we have our own assets, we have our own wastewater treatment works. We have an opportunity here to channel funding into upgrading them and making a meaningful contribution to improving our water quality, and also generating credits on the side to fund that programme. So I think, yeah, looking at a holistic view of the work we do, there is the legal LPA side of it, our duty as a competent authority. There's also the delivery side of it. There's a whole wraparound, and partnership working comes as part of that. So I think water quality should be right at the forefront of what we do. It is right at the forefront of what we do, but also we're delivering to ensure nutrient neutrality and also generate income to sustain that programme.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's get into the details. I know lots of you want to. Councillor Lee first, then Councillor Power.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the paper. I wanted to go to the third scheme, which was the Solent Householder Septic Tank Upgrades Programme. And in conversation with Councillor Powell, I've shown obviously some interest since it was announced. There is a programme of 33 upgrades, as I understand it. There is Monitoring Authority received £16,000 to cover the monitoring role. I wonder if that's enough. But my question really is, we would like to see this rolled out, as you hinted at, Chair, into the southern parishes. Do we really have to wait for the 33 upgrades programme to be complete? Or is there a point when 10 are done, when there's sufficient lessons learnt, so that we can actually take the pilot and roll it out elsewhere? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a partnership South Hampshire-led scheme. They've identified the first phase being in Bishop Stutton as an area that is ideal for this kind of work. Lots of septic tanks, poor water quality, and opportunity to generate nutrient credits in an area of the Upper Itchen where there's not a significant supply of credits to meet housing development in that area. They are going to be expanding that one. They're looking at a second phase actually in the New Forest area. So while outside of our current Winchester district boundaries, that's another phase that's going to be launching, and they're currently doing the preparatory work for that one. The learnings that we get from this scheme, how it works, how we navigate the householders developing it, working with installers, will help to inform that second phase. And then the third phase will then be a wider rollout across the Solent and the wider Itchen area across the entire catchment. So there could well be opportunities as part of later stages, with any remaining funding that's left, to upgrade in other areas.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, Chair, thank you. Councillor, I think this is a recognition of the capacity that we have at this time within the council to deliver the programme. And I think the paper very much sets out the management that we've put around this, so that we have it phased and we have it programmed, and we know that we can deliver. It's a practical programme based on what capacity we have at the moment, and I think that is where then we will have to see what can be done in the later stages. But I think it's recognition of where we are at this moment.
I think we need to recognise shortly, don't we, that Bishop Sutton is an obvious target because it generates phosphate credits that are incredibly expensive, and it's above Alresford, where the building is going on. Is that fair?
Yeah, correct. So there's a significant need for phosphorus mitigation. That's the area in the Upper Itchen where there's a significant lack of phosphorus needs to meet the pipeline of housing we're expecting, and also water quality in the area. So that's why it's been an area that's been targeted.
Okay. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got several points, as you would expect. On page 26, we refer to the Goodens being upstream of Alresford. It is not upstream of Alresford, although I understand it shares the same catchment as Alresford. So if we could stop saying that, it would stop me grinding my teeth every time I read it, please. On page 27, we refer to the timescales. Now, if Southern Water upgrade to a phosphate stripper at the Appledown Works wastewater treatment plants, the value of those P credits is forecast to fall to almost negligible values. Now, both the PUSH programme of replacement systems and our programme of upgrading our wastewater treatment plants is financed by the sale of those P credits to a very large degree. They're about 100,000 a piece. So when that cliff edge arrives in 2030, assuming Southern Water say what they're going to do, will we still be able to fund an upgrade programme for our wastewater treatment plants? That's quite a complicated question, but I will skip over the rest, I promise. On page 29, we refer to Hobbs Close being done. I think I've been told that that is no longer viable because it doesn't generate enough P credits. The drainage field is so efficient at the moment that it won't be going ahead. So that probably needs correction. And lastly, we have a few third-party schemes that have been installed, which have generated P&N credits for sale. Are we happy with the performance of those private upgrades? And how are we addressing any shortfall in the expected nutrient mitigation from those private upgrades? Thank you.
Microphone. Thank you. So 3 points, I'll address each of those in turn. The first one is on phosphorus credits, and what you've referenced is the LURA, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, and the requirement for wastewater treatment works to be upgraded by 2030. That's quite a long time scale when we look at the Gantt chart figure 2 that's provided in the report. The timescales we're looking at for delivering our next 6 tranches of delivery are by the end of Q3 27-28. So we're hoping to get these delivered and have the credits to market well in advance of 2030. We also know that it's quite an uncertain policy picture at the moment. We've got LURA, and we know that these schemes can come forward, but we've also got other schemes and other policies coming forward, like some of the planning acts we've seen recently with new environmental delivery plans that I mentioned as the risks. So we are operating in quite an uncertain and risky thing. That's the fact for anyone who's doing this kind of work. We're conscious of that. We're continually assessing and monitoring our risk as we go through key decision gateways on this one. It's something we have to monitor as we go on, and we're working closely with the Partnership for South Hampshire to assess that situation. They're well connected with policymakers and DEFRA. They'll be exploring that situation and feeding it in as we go along. Second point is then on Hobbs Close, and this one, as we've reported, is not being progressed as part of the next delivery tranche 3. That was a decision made internally by our PAC board upon consideration of outline business case for that scheme. Part of the reason for it is quite a complex one. All of our schemes are dependent on essentially an assessment of the hydrogeology in the area. That determines whether the effluent, when it does produce, does in fact actually lead to a nutrient mitigation in the area. And it also determines lag times, how long it takes for that effluent to reach the watercourse. That is kind of make or break whether there's a scheme, really. In some cases, the lag time might be tens of years, hundreds of years, and that would mean that it's impossible for us to actually generate and sell credits from that. In the case of Hobbs Close, the Hobbs Close sewage treatment work is actually very close to one of the main channels that leads to the River Isle and then onto the Itchen. So on the face of it, it looked like a really, really strong site. However, we're obviously led by our hydrogeological study that we commissioned, which gives us the information and the background. In the area, the treated effluent infiltrates into the chalk aquifer. There's very little runoff, so it goes all the way into the aquifer. And what we find is it's very strongly attenuated in that. So it's stored in there, and it takes, in some cases for phosphorus, which is a particularly sticky element, tens to hundreds and in some cases thousands of years to actually reach the River Isle and then onwards onto the Itchen. That's quite a challenging one, because it means when we're trying to calculate a lag time, we've got a mid-range of about 140 all the way up to about 800 years. That's not something we can build a business case on. For a lag time to work for us and to get the credits to the market, we are looking at sites where it's about a year or less. That means upon completion of the site development, we can get those credits to the market in a year. This one doesn't look like the case. So we would be progressing the business case for this one. That would be particularly risky. That's for phosphorus. For nitrates, similar situation, although less attenuated, which means that we could probably get about 50% of the nitrates within 4 years. There's an income stream, but longer time scales, less uncertainty. It's more of a challenging site. that's something we've only sort of really determined through this last phase of feasibility work. And then I'll address the third part, which is on third party, and that one is around the quality of the phosphorus and nitrogen credits that are for sale, and do we feel confident in them? I mean, that's part of the role of the local planning authority as the competent authority. We do need to be confident in nutrient mitigation, and that's how we try and secure it through Section 106 agreements and other legal mechanisms. In general, we do find that any that are based on what's called a PIU certificate, it's basically the performance of a nutrient mitigation site, sewage treatment work. If they rely on calculations based on that, typically in practice and site, they don't always perform as you would in a laboratory testing condition. So typically they do generally perform slightly less well or around about that value. So we've not seen a huge amount of issues with local sewage treatment works not performing, but there are isolated cases where they might not be. And in those cases, the local planning authority has been very proactive in saying we'll cut on the selling of any of those credits until we've got a resolution to that and we've got confidence that it is in fact achieving the nutrient mitigation it says it would. Another thing that's coming to the fore now is a more precautionary approach to calculating credits that can be generated by a scheme. Rather than relying on the PIU certificate, the laboratory testing that says here's how much can be done, we apply significant precautionary buffers to that to ensure that we're not claiming it can lead to that really stringent reduction. We have a bit more of a safety net. So in reality, rather than claiming, for example, a reduction to 1.6 TP per year phosphorus, precautionary approach would say 5 TP. So we're not claiming a significant reduction. It gives us a bit more of a buffer. That approach is being used more nationally now. We're seeing more schemes emerge that way, and ourselves, the local planning authority, are more supportive of that approach.
I have one more, Chairman, because it's a longer term problem. We have requests for upgrading our wastewater treatment plants on the Meon and in Micheldever on Dever and the Test. Those sites do not and probably may never generate P credits. How are we going to finance upgrades to those of the Winchester wastewater treatment plants that we would like to upgrade in order to satisfy our NIP?
Yeah. We've currently obviously got the budget for the scheme that we've set out here. So that's for tranches 2 and 3. The schemes that we're taking forward, their priority because they generate credits, and we can obviously wash our face when it comes to the financial case for the schemes. It may well be desire to upgrade those schemes in the future, but equally the challenge we have with those ones is they would be funded by ourselves with no income stream to cover that. So if there was the desire to upgrade those schemes for water quality benefits, then that business case would need to come forward and be approved on that rationale.
One from me before I come to you, Councillor Lee. I don't know if you watched the Channel 4 drama documentary on what happened on the River Windrush a few weeks ago. The problems there were caused by the move to the Environment Agency, allowing water companies to self-monitor their waste treatment plants. I'm hoping that we don't rely on self-monitoring of private new plants in our district, because that would imply that we haven't learned any lessons.
No, we do not. There's a section on the role of ourselves as the local planning authority, and it talks a bit at a high level overview of the kind of legal agreements that we have in place to secure the monitoring of those schemes. We make sure that any third party mitigation schemes that come forward, they go through us, and we ensure that we got a monitoring agreement in place to ensure that if there are any sites that aren't performing, we can intervene and use our powers at that stage. So that gives us the power and confidence as competent authority that those schemes coming forward are not underperforming.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
You're clearly telepathic. My question is sort of related. It's about the issue of enforcement. If private systems fail or are poorly maintained or replaced with lower performing systems, how will we know? How do we manage it? What's the oversight?
Good point on that one. Go for it.
This was a significant part of the decision about the cost. So people that have those plants or the S106 arrangement demands the response from that on an annual basis. But Winchester City Council retains the right to go in and do a check at any time if we feel that it's not up to standard. And the figure that we put in allows us to serve a notice to replace that plant if necessary within that 125 years. So we allowed in the calculation for at least a visit every 5 years, but also being aware that actually other visits might be necessary.
I'm just going to have one more, if I may, then. I've been repeatedly told that phosphate credits have to be generated above the point where development is proposed. There's a development site at Hinton Ampner at the head of the Itchen. You can't go and get phosphate credits from higher up the Itchen than that. First of all, and this is not a question you can answer now, I'm sure, but perhaps provide me with a note afterwards. What is the justification? Where is it laid down that those credits have to be generated above the site? Secondly, let's take that as read that that's the case. How does a site like the one at Hinton Ampner ever get built out if it's physically impossible to generate phosphate credits to mitigate it?
Yep, I can answer that one. So it's Natural England advice. They've been very clear that phosphorus mitigation, not nitrogen mitigation, but phosphorus mitigation, the location principle matters, and mitigation has to be upstream of the point where the development has an impact on the affected watercourse. So that is Natural England guidance. I can circulate the link if required, but that is Natural England guidance, and it's very firm on that one and understood amongst anyone working in this industry. Your other point was around the site in particular, and that it can't generate phosphorus credits. It may well be able to generate nitrogen credits. Nitrogen credits don't have that location principle applied to them, as long as they're being generated in the same catchment area. So in the case of a lot of these schemes, that would be in the Test and Itchen catchments. They can generate nutrient credits, and they can be sold. They're currently sold at, by us anyway, at 3,250 per tonne of that nitrogen. So per kilogram, sorry, of nitrogen. So yeah, it's still a way of generating income from those
the
schemes.
phosphorus I'm getting at, because if you can't generate the credits higher up the Itchen, then how do you mitigate the phosphorus?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. That's why there's been a demand for more phosphorus in the Upper Itchen area, because there's a certain amount of land available to do that. It can be quite challenging. So there are schemes coming forward like the one in Bishop Sutton, which is generating phosphorus credits in the Upper Itchen to do that. But that's why it's such a big challenge. You've got a small area. It's much harder to get these schemes forward, much harder to find the solutions. And that's part of the reason why they command a higher price as well. When we generate nitrogen from schemes, you often get quite a lot of nitrogen reduction, where phosphorus is a lot less. So almost if you put a pound per kilo of credits, much harder and less lucrative for phosphorus, hence why it's reflected in the increased cost.
Right, let's move on to debate. Any points of debate on this one? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted just to re-emphasise the point that you've made, and I think we discussed at the beginning about framing mitigation, not just around development enablement and credit income, but more about the rural river or the rural recovery, household resilience and village infrastructure improvements. And I think that will resonate and get more reach and engagement. I think that's really important. Thank you.
Any more?
Chairman,
Councillor Power, I thought you must have.
well, I've been hammering away at this, it feels for years now, and this is a really good paper, and it puts the context of what we're doing and how we're doing it. I just wish it had been earlier, because that would have quiesced a certain amount of argy-bargy I get from the Test and Itchen Association. It's good work. I'm glad we've got the paper. It will save me a lot of brief, but I need more. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I would certainly echo that. And I think, yes, it is a very good paper and it sets out a lot of the detail that a lot of us have been missing for some while. So thank you very much indeed for that. And I think it's really important that all members across the council realise that to many of us outside the city, this is pretty near our top issue. Water quality, nutrient mitigation in terms of development and you know, all aspects of this. So it's really good to have this discussion this evening and to get a lot of these things out in the open. Councillor Porter, you want to come back in?
Thank you. I suppose I'm going to give you credit for the 16th of March paper, really, in the sense that as cabinet members, we've been pressing to get this as one project rather than a project done in three different departments, three different areas, and putting it under Alex has really been transformational. I'd just like to thank Alex for that, but also to say that we are conscious that it is, I mean, as you know, in the area I represent, I've got the Itchen and the Diva, and it's really important to residents and it's on every single parish council meeting. So I do absolutely understand how important it is. And also been working with Southern Water on a project which has taken something like 2 years longer than we thought in order to get to a point of taking wastewater away from a village into a water treatment plant. So this is important and we understand absolutely why it's important. So it's really great to have it under one heading, which is under Alex, to produce this paper. It's made a real difference. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important that we all see this as a waypoint in a, you know, on a journey, as it were, to use that awful cliche. You know, this is not an end in itself, is it? We need to now take this forward and do more on it. And specifically when we do meet up with Southern Water on the 17th of September, I think we need to seek their assurance as well that they're focusing as much on water quality for its own sake as water quality as part of their business. And we'll see what we get from them.
And we do know that they are working with major landowners, not just on systems like this, but on other work too. And I can remember when Southern Water sat at Push and said, "Don't know what we're going to do." English Nature said, "Don't know what we're going to do," and so Natural England did, and so did everybody else. And so we are making huge progress by concentrating on 3 specific programs. We hopefully will make a real difference. Whereas if we'd done a scattergun approach, we would never have got this one.
Good, thank you. Councillor Pinniger, you want a quick word?
Quick word. So there are some places that don't qualify for wastewater treatment plants, like Bishop Sutton. And I'm just wondering what we can do, or what we are going to do, for those places that don't qualify. You know, because I don't know if in the norm, you know, just a standard programme of work, they're due for something, and if so, what and when? Thank you.
So the Partnership for South Hampshire are coordinating the strategic approach to nutrient mitigation across the wider Hampshire Solent area. So they've taken a leading role. The Solent Household Mitigation Scheme is kind of a flagship example of them targeting an area like Bishop Sutton to provide that mitigation. They're focusing on that area because that area in the Upper Itchen is seen as the most pressed area for the supply of nutrient mitigation and also for phosphorus in particular. So that's the area that they're choosing to prioritise their resources and their funding from the government on. They are looking to, in later phases, roll out further funding to other areas, like I mentioned previously, the New Forest, and then eventually the wider area, so everywhere covered within their geography. But that will be done in a bit of a later date. So I'd like to think that, subject to the resources that the Partnership for South Hampshire have got, they might be willing to do the rollout of that scheme into other areas and provide a similar scheme for householders to upgrade their septic tanks. But at the moment, they're focusing on the areas of most pressing need, and that's informed by a supply and demand analysis that they produce and present to their joint committee on a quarterly basis. So that's kind of their evidence base that underpins why they're doing this. But yeah, essentially, residents do need help. They need support with getting their schemes upgraded, and they recognise that.
But I think your question is pertinent to that whole debate, and if I could ask you to sort of hold it in reserve for the 17th of September, and that's exactly one of the points that we need to bring up with Southern Water then, because I think there's an opportunity as we might suggest it to them, for them to do more work in that area. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that paper. That's really useful, and I think that's been a really useful exchange of views there as well. So thank you, and we will now move on. Should we take a quick 2-minute break if people want to get a glass of water? And we'll carry on when that clock has just gone past 8 o'clock. carry on. Good, thank you. We're on to item 11, which is SIL, Winchester SIL. Councillor Wallace, you wanted to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. Yep. I welcome this presentation and in particular the desire to make community infrastructure level funding work harder and faster for our communities. We all agree SIL is a valuable mechanism, and since its introduction, almost £27 million has been collected across the district, with around £20 million retained by Winchester City Council for wider infrastructure investment. This presentation also highlights that most of the retained funding has now either been spent or committed. However, I believe there's an important question that sits underneath this discussion. Before we focus solely on spending SIL faster, we should be asking whether communities across the district are seeing a fair share of the infrastructure investment that SIL is intended to deliver. The presentation provides useful information about how much money has been collected, committed and spent, but it does not show members where that money has been generated and where it has ultimately been invested. That matters because SIL is collected as a consequence of development. Residents rightly expect that where development takes place, there will be corresponding investment in the infrastructure needed to support growing communities. If some communities have been particularly successful in bringing forward projects, that is to be welcomed, but we should also ask whether every community has the same opportunity to access funding, or whether differences in local capacity, officer support, or bid writing experience have affected outcomes. The presentation asks how we can encourage more ambitious and impactful bids from communities. My suggestion is that the first step is transparency. Members and residents would benefit from a clear picture showing where SIL has been collected from across the district, where it has been spent or committed, what funding remains, and whether there are parts of the district that may be underrepresented in the current programme. Providing that information would help build confidence that future allocations are being made on the basis of evidence and need, and would help identify communities that may require additional support to bring forward projects. I therefore hope the committee will encourage the administration to place fairness, transparency and accessibility alongside speed of delivery as key objectives for the future management of SIL. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Now, who's going to Sue? Are you going to lead off on this, or Steve, or Councillor Balls?
Yeah, I'll say a few words before I pass over. Just to say that SIL is something that is collected. There are two ways of collecting money for from development for infrastructure. There's S106 and the SIL. And some districts choose not to collect SIL at all. They just do it all through S106, and it's delivered exactly to where the actual buildings and development is. We have a general principle that SIL is collected, as you know, when it first started, when lots of people said we're having housing in this area and we don't see any infrastructure for it, and SIL was a reaction to that, really. And it's not expected to be exactly house for house, place for place. The idea is that it brings infrastructure to an area rather than specifically to a community. And I think that's the difference between the S106, which is supposed to deliver to that community, and the SIL that actually delivers across a wider area with benefits for the whole community. I just want to say that before we started, but the paper was really interesting. I think the point is that we had a working party about 4 years ago, and some more work was done on that, and it was trying to separate into blocks of pockets of money, of how we would spend that money to try and encourage the community to think about the areas where it was important in which we put money. And health and well-being was one of them. You see the whole description in the paper. I just mentioned that because as time has gone on, we've realised that we've spent much more than we originally expected in the wider community. Originally, it was that we were going to spend £300,000 over 3 years. We're now spending well over that every year, and it's changing and evolving as the needs and the possibilities of SIL are being seen. So this paper really is the launch pad for the next phase, I think. Steve, do you want to have a word if you want?
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have anything much else to add. Obviously, there's a lot of information in the slides. I was just going to touch a little bit on the Section 106 comparison and the difference, which we didn't want to dwell on in the slides because the presentation and the discussion is primarily around SIL, but that distinction between the two and how the two operate was helpful. So, but I don't think I've got anything else to add to what Councillor Porter said there. So really, I suppose it was from me, it was just to remind members of the committee the two key things that we're keen to get from tonight is to understand whether you think the steps that we've set out in the presentation in the final slide or two around ways that we are hopefully going to look to accelerate and speed up and increase the rate of spend is helpful. Obviously, we have LGR on the horizon, and we want to make sure that the money that's been collected from Winchester District is applied to create the most benefit for residents of Winchester District. And then secondly, as Councillor Wallace referred to, there is a recognition that what we want to do is to deliver really good, really high quality, really impactful schemes. So, your experience, your understanding, your thoughts on what we can do differently or better to try and encourage those sort of more impactful schemes to come forward from communities across the district. Any thoughts on that would be really welcome, so we can work with our communities to bring forward the greatest benefit from the allocation of SIL. Other than that, yeah, happy to take questions or support the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, for the slide set. And clearly, looking at the two slides where you show examples of completed projects, there's been some terrific projects that have been delivered with SIL money, and I don't think any of us would dispute that. Can I also say that we are not here to rip apart and rewrite how SIL is distributed, but I think, anticipating some of the questions that are about to be asked, we might just focus on areas where we think the process is perhaps not as transparent as it might be. And secondly, how it is that, I'll take my own ward as an example, I'm sure others have pretty similar examples that they can cite. I was told last week that Upper Meon Valley has been one of the largest beneficiaries of SIL. And then I found out, when I sort of scratched my head and asked the question, well, hang on a second, why is it none of my villages are getting their play projects funded or whatever? And it turns out that SIL money has gone to the Science Centre for solar panels on its roof, and the Chilcombe Sports Ground that we bought from Hampshire for £1 a few years ago. And none of it's gone to community projects. Now, I don't want an answer to that now. I'll let that hang in the air. But I think other people will have similar stories to tell. I'd also like us to bring out how Winchester SIL is used across the whole of Winchester District, mindful that there is another LPA. And then yesterday, I was part of the South Downs SIL process. I was equally astonished to find that an awfully large amount of South Downs SIL has gone into rebuilding the steps on St Giles Hill. St Giles Hill, the other, St Catherine's Hill, for example, that probably we here didn't know about. So, two SIL pots, both being spent in Winchester, quite a lot of it in Winchester City. Winchester City spending it in UMV within the South Downs LPA area, and vice versa. There's something that doesn't feel quite right about that. but I'll let other people come in. I think councillors, go on.
Sorry, if I may, councillor, on some of the points that you raised there. So Steve, I think it would be helpful on the point that you raised around the process maybe not being particularly transparent. Would you like to give members a whistle-stop tour of how the process is moved through, how we move through that process? I think it might be maybe helpful.
Can I just butt in there and say, I think we're all happy that there's a scoring process and that's all fine. It's more when the batting order is worked out, how is that approved, please? That's what I would like to know.
And that's what I wanted the officers to. So I think we can, if we can get a whistle stop, that'd be very helpful.
And yeah, it will absolutely be whistle stop. So you are officers, we've got an approved set of criteria. We assess the applications against. Officers undertake that assessment, and that and those assessments then go before a panel of members, cabinet members, and senior officers who review those and who add their thoughts and comments on the assessment that the officers have undertaken. And then beyond that, those applications go to cabinet then for approval and submission. So officers will make a recommendation that goes to cabinet for approval and acceptance. So that's the process that we go through. Clear and objective with all applications, and transparency. The report that goes to members for approval sets out our assessment, the key thinking behind it, and demonstrates the sort of relative merits of the various bids that have come in and explains any particular strengths and weaknesses around them.
Okay, so again, if we leave that hanging in the air, that it's a batting order that goes straight to cabinet for approval. That's what you're telling me.
Via a member panel.
What is the member panel? How is that constituted? What committee is it?
So I chair the member panel historically, and Councillor Becker is there representing communities, and Councillor Lerney is there because of movement and transport and climate change. It's also attended by a lawyer, planning lawyer, to make sure that what we're making a decision about is legal. The SIL team, including our officer who advises people when they say they're interested in doing a SIL application, and also Steve and Sue are there as well. And at the end we see every single application that has come in that time. They are scored with scores against items, and the applicants know what those scores are going to be against each items. We look specifically at whether the local councillor has been supportive of it, and if they haven't, then that's at risk of not having any support at all. And we are very, very clear that that process has to be objective. And then once that's done, we come out of it with, rarely actually have we rejected because we haven't got enough money on that day. We have always, if an application is appropriate, we take it forward. If a village or a community has got SIL already, we expect them to contribute some of their SIL to it. And if they don't, then that generally means that's because they haven't had any development. And so there's no serious change to the infrastructure that community should have. However, there have been very occasional situations when that hasn't. But from there, that board, it goes forward and it is then recommended to cabinet through a paper which is presented by Mr. Robinson's team.
So I should have said it goes to a cabinet subcommittee and then to cabinet.
Yeah, yes, to the cabinet subcommittee.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lee.
I think that demonstrates.
You've got it. I said Councillor. Hang on. I said Councillor Lee.
I did beg your
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back on some Councillor Porter's descriptions of what the process is, which I think you've explained many times. And I just wonder, in terms of the comment that Councillor Wallace has made, and I think there's a general sentiment about fairness and the member panel, I just wonder whether they could be more collegiate to get the more one district approach, maybe with a mix of councillors, which might potentially, I think, be city focused. So I wonder if there's an opportunity there. But I think the problem goes back another step. how will we obviously must increase access to SIL funds. It makes sense. We don't want to go into the LGR and have it dispersed into Midlands, not our benefit. So some of our parish councils are underpowered. So how will the council help parishes to develop stronger bids rather than simply telling them to be more ambitious? I think that's an important point. Some parish councils are better than others. Could I also ask, should there be a heat map as to where all the various SIL spend is and has happened? I think that would be helpful. And my final question is, removing the ring fencing across 2 of the 3 funds, what actually does that mean? I wonder if you could clarify that as well, please. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to go?
Take the easy one first. In terms of the heat map, absolutely, it's something that we've been working. We have something we've been working on with the discussion, sort of the thinking going on, building up to this committee. So that is something we publish. Members might be aware, we publish something called an infrastructure funding statement every year. We have statutory requirement to publish the data behind SIL. And what we've done for the last couple of years, and we're due to publish the next one anytime now. So members will see that in the DSU in the next few weeks, that's been published, and where you can find that on the website. That also includes a bit more of a positive story around SIL. So rather than just the statutory return, we now include some really good information around some of the positive case studies, things that have been delivered, things that have been undertaken in the last year. And what we are going to do is look to include in that a kind of heat map type of approach to give a little bit more clarity around where the money's been applied. Not always the easiest thing to do, because the benefit of projects doesn't always necessarily apply solely within the geographical boundary of a parish or an area that the physical facility sits. You know, the catchment, there's a lot of nuance around the catchment that serve the communities that are served by a particular piece of infrastructure. But we're looking at a way to kind of make the best job of that we can, that gives the best representation of where the money's been applied and where the benefit is felt.
If I take the other one, Councillor, around how we can help our parishes, and I think we were somewhat asking for some thoughts and ideas from members here as to how, as officers, we can best do that. Asking it of you almost as part of this conversation around what do you feel that could be done, but I would say that we do hold webinars, we hold sessions, we hold engagement sessions where we provide guidance, information, we reach out and we engage. So we do try our best efforts to reach people, and I think so that's what we're asking of members who are in those locations. How from your view can we better do that? That's something.
A quick come back on that, if I may. I think one of the exemplars which could be developed is the Rural England Prosperity Fund process. I think the hand holding of, I think it was Camilla, wasn't it, was absolutely brilliant. When parish councils were floundering and didn't know what to do, there was help at hand, particularly for the smaller parishes. I think that's absolutely vital. Some parishes are brilliant. I know that. So that would be my first idea.
I would just add to that, that South Downs had a similar problem with that, it's very difficult for small parishes to bring big projects forward because they don't have the people, the experience to be able to do it. And the South Downs SIL fund is now funding some help to reach out to parishes to help deliver their projects. So I think that's a common thread we perhaps ought to learn from. Councillor Power.
One question.
Oh, sorry.
Can I just go back to it? And that was the removing the ring fencing across 2 of the partners. Thank you.
Could you just clarify what exactly the question is, Councillor?
I think when I read the paper, it said you'll be removing ring fencing across 2 of the 3 funds for prioritising deliverable and high impact schemes. And I just wondered if you could just expand on that. What actually does that mean in terms of improvement? Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, so for the last few years, there's been 3 ring fences applied as set out in the report that has determined 60%, 30% and 10% to be ring fenced for use for particular projects or particular types of activity. As we've moved towards a point where the funds are being spent more quickly, so therefore there's less available, and as we're moving towards rapidly towards LGR and the end of our ability to influence how this money's applied, what we advised is that in particular we were finding that some of the active travel and transport schemes were not necessarily coming forward to delivery. Lots of reasons behind that. But what we felt was but we were getting an increasing demand and pressure for community-led schemes. And what we wanted to do was to try and create as much flexibility as possible to apply the money at the right time, so that schemes which were effectively ready to go and gave us a good degree of certainty around deliverability could be supported. It doesn't. So we effectively removed or combined both of those pots. So the 30 and the 10% have been combined into a single ring fence of 40%. It doesn't change our ability to fund any of the same things that have always been funded. It just gives us a little more flexibility. And if, for example, we continue to see a sort of delays in some schemes coming forward, it means that we can prioritize or allocate funding to other schemes that give us some certainty around deliverability.
If I may, Chair, just a point of clarity with local government reorganisation. There is no clarity at the moment about how the sealed pots will work. So officers have advised members that we don't know all of the answers around that. However, if you want to 100%, if we want to be 100% sure that this funding is going to be spent on Winchester City Council district residents, then it's to spend it now before those guidelines come out. So we're not saying we're just spending it because we will lose control. We're saying at the moment, in the absence of guidance, this is the approach that we are using.
Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Power, then Councillor Cooper, then Councillor Ackle.
Chairman, I think the restricting the spend to the parish where there has been built demonstrates a total ignorance of how life is lived in a market town. So say we have 1,400 new residents in Alresford. They'll go to bounce in Old Alresford, they'll play cricket in Brighton and Titchbourne, they'll go to school in Itchen Abbas and Rockley, they'll use preschools in Bishop Sutton and Itchen Abbas, they'll use footpaths in all the surrounding parishes, they'll go to the cinema in Bishop Sutton and Brighton, they'll play badminton in Itchen Abbas and bridge in Bishop Sutton and Buith. Those surrounding parishes need upgrades to their infrastructure because you're getting an overspill from the market town. We use facilities in all the surrounding parishes, and to restrict it to just those parishes where there has been development is wasting an opportunity, quite frankly.
And what's the question out of that?
Oh, yes. There's unspent funds on page 39, where we've given consent to schemes and they have not been delivered. Are we going to recover that money and start spending it? And could we have some examples of green-blue infrastructure, please?
Okay. So in terms of reclaiming those, yes, we absolutely are. There's actually only quite a small number. The majority of the funding that's been allocated but not spent relates to actually very recent allocations. There's a very small number. There's actually, I think it's only 2 community schemes that have been allocated previously to 2023. So there's only a couple, but they are significant. And at a time when the funding is reducing, we are going to follow those up. And the intent, it's obviously challenging because people aren't just sitting on that money. They are striving to raise the funds and get a project to a point where it's ready to be delivered. But there are ones there that we potentially do need to do that. So we are actually going to be looking to do that now.
And does that include the money given to Hampshire County Council? Has that all been spent and delivered now?
There's actually all of the funding that's currently allocated to Hampshire County Council has been in the last 18 months. So we continue to meet with those. We've actually instigated some officer-to-officer meetings in the very recent past, which are now happening on a regular basis to try and track and bring forward schemes quicker. All of those schemes that are currently allocated funding are progressing. They just, I expect members have experience of the time that it generally takes for those kind of engineering works to work through feasibility, through to design, through deliverability. So we're working very closely with officers at Hampshire to impress upon them the importance to us of speed of deliverability. So there are none there which are significantly kind of historic that we will actually be chasing back, but we will be like I say, working more closely with them in the coming months to really track the speed that they're moving forward and the likelihood of them coming forward within a sensible time frame. Yeah, green blue infrastructure. There's a bit of a kind of grey area between what's green blue infrastructure and what's kind of public open space. There's a number of initiatives that have been public open space, which to a degree are green infrastructure. We've actually not. I'm not sure we funded any. Well, I say not funded anything. We've done some flood mitigation works around Derngate. Other than that, blue infrastructure, Councillor Porter.
Done a lot of work with footpaths alongside the Itchen, where there's a lot of ecological study that needs to be involved in that. So there's quite a significant amount that's actually happened. We've got 2 at the moment. We have to wait for that very tight season to do the work. So you have to do, by the time you've given the money, you've then got the next year to do the ecological studies, and then you hopefully contract the work to be done the following year. But there are 2 of those currently outstanding.
Okay, Councillor Timmy Cooper.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm trying to sort of condense them all. I think the notion of the sealed subcommittee as a sort of decision making forum, or at least the kind of the part of the process of this is not a, you know, it's not an inherently wrong way of doing things, because I mean the members that you mentioned, Councillor Porter, on that group have a very good understanding of the district generally, but I can see a lot of force in what Councillor Lee says around having more wider member involvement in that panel, and whether it could look like somewhat, I don't know how it looks like, but whether that's possible is a question I have, and how we could do that would be interesting. I know, for example, we could do with the last time I think Cecile was looked at and shared with members there was an email, it was a couple of years ago, that went around in the DSU, for example, and so could we be doing that now with a fresh start? With this paper is in front of our minds is a question. And I think going to what Susan Robbins has said about looking for us to kind of come up with engagement ideas, I think that panel really needs to be informed by the communities that we have in the district and by what people want to see this money spent on. And so whether there's an idea of actually setting up a kind of specifics directed citizens panel for SEAL to sort of from representatives from around the district to do that, what that looks like, can't think of it right now, but I know Sue, you were saying that we do have engagement events with community groups and charities, but whether we have a sort of new one specifically targeted with as many community groups and charities as possible, community driven bids as possible, I would love to see that, because I'm looking at the list for my ward of SEAL spending. Some of the very best ones are being driven by community groups, and you know, I think the Theatre Royal, for example, has done absolutely brilliant work with the SEAL money it's had allocated. And so whether we can look at that, because question, sorry, several questions in there.
I think the answer to that is yes, we can certainly look at it. We can go away. We certainly engage all of those groups in terms of their supporting them in their ability to deliver scheme or to apply for schemes. Councillor Porter, did you want to say something? Okay, so yeah, we certainly support. We certainly meet and in terms of increasing awareness, making sure that we maximise the number of people who understand what's possible, what they can apply for, how they can apply for it. We can certainly take away and give some thought to whether there's potential to include some stakeholders in a slightly different way in terms of informing priorities for where funding's allocated. We can take that thought away and give it some consideration.
If I could just come in at Steve's point, to manage expectation, we are less than 12 months out from shadow authority. Are we in a position to redesign major approaches to things? Probably not, to manage expectation. And I don't want to sound like I'm being negative, but actually I think we have to recognise the landscape that we're operating in at the moment and the journey that we are moving on from district to unitary life and what that will look like. And therefore I wouldn't want to set expectations with residents that this is the way we're going to do things moving forward, because we've got a very short window to do that in. However, I take on board the points that you raised around actually how can we actively encourage the community to do things and bring bids forward. And I think that's the piece, and that's the question that officers had this evening. With your knowledge on the ground, how would you think we would get the most traction to do that in the landscape that we're operating in at the moment? But I just want to manage expectations.
I think the two things are related. I think there's a lot of feeling out there that the current system has something wrong with it. Don't know quite what the something is. And a lot of people would like to bring more community schemes through. But with the current system as it is, that's difficult. And we all accept exactly what you say, that in the current climate of reorganisation, we ain't going to come up with a new system in the next year. But I think it's really useful to get all these points aired, because if we don't do that here, then nobody gets a voice at all. So I'm going to let this run a little longer with Councillor Ashwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was itching to jump in there, actually. So I was at a parish council meeting yesterday, and I told them to be ambitious, find a project to help spend this money. I think that's what us as councillors need to be doing.
Sorry, just
Chairman, I really must come in here. I have to declare an interest. I applied for a SIL grant from the South Wales National Park, so it might have been your list yesterday, or whatever you were looking. And so I know as a challenge, as a small charity, that it takes a lot of tenacity to get that application in. Yeah, and it was part of a bigger one for a parish. It takes a lot of tenacity, but I can assure you that Parish Connect, Community News, all of those things have exactly the detail that parishes need and community groups need in order to apply. They need to just pick up the phone or make an email to the officer, and she will go through the detail of that application process. Far better, actually, than the South Wales National Park, who leave you on the website, but that's another matter. So there's a very personal relationship that builds up between the applicant and the officer, and she can guide appropriately. So it's not a matter of not having someone to be there for the person, but it is a certain amount of tenacity to get that application made. In many cases, the parishes, I went to a parish last week and he said, the clerk said, I know the deadline's the 12th, we haven't done it yet. I said, well, get on with it, because you've got about another 5 days. And it is, people leave it to the last minute because they think they are worried about filling it, or they just don't get around to it, which is why we added in a second run this year. So this conversation today is really useful, but it's about thinking about how we can get people to have the sticking power to get to the end of that form, because it isn't that difficult. It's no more difficult than a community grant form. It does need some estimates made, and the estimates are often hard to get, and that's what puts people off, which is why we've gone for 2 times this year. But actually, sometimes people only got 2 estimates, but we can have that conversation. But it has to be deliverable, and deliverability is one of the criteria, because we don't want to be sitting there with money that's wasted. And I take Councillor Powers' point on board, that I'm really a little bit frustrated that the public see it as the parish council's responsibility. It's not, it's a community group responsibility, and everybody has the opportunity. And as John said, that Councillor Tippett Cooper said, there are some really excellent ones that come from the community if we can get them to apply for it.
Okay, Councillor Brophy wants to go, and then Councillor Power.
Again, it's similar to Councillor Tippett Cooper, lots of boards trying to boil it down into a clear question. Thinking about the idea of a heat map of where things are allocated and understanding that, but also thinking about Councillor Power's comment about how people live today, and that certain services you use aren't directly in the areas that the development might be happening. I'm also thinking about the challenge that we have as council, or the challenge we give ourselves to try and make sure that services are more walkable or cyclable. So on the one hand, we have a kind of car-centric world whereby, as a person from Badger Farm, Oliver's Battery, I will regularly go across and play football by the leisure centre, with my family, which is obviously going to a very different area, thereby benefiting from the SIL funds. However, that's not actually in line with the objectives of becoming more cyclable and walkable, because it's more of a car-centric approach. When we sort of take into account that kind of heat map approach, or that kind of allocation of projects to be kind of accessible to people, are we actually thinking cars, or are we thinking walking? Is that ever in the kind of mix, or is it just a case of what's deliverable where?
I think it's in the mix. As part of the application, we challenge the applicants to explain to us who the beneficiaries are, where they come from, the nature of them, and whether they're particular groups, particular demographics, and then we assess that. It's a subjective thing. It's very, very hard to come up with, if you like, a formula that kind of assesses. Well, there's so many nuances and things in there, so we will consider that. And the information that we're provided in there around who benefits, where they come from, and how that facility serves the locality and the wider area, is all part of the mix. So we consider it. Like I say, there is a degree of subjectivity in there in terms of how that works. It comes back to the point about Councillor Power made about where we go for our services and our activities, and absolutely recognise that, and that does play into the consideration. It is part of the SIL regulation in terms of that the funding is to support and mitigate against the cost, against the impact of development. So we do have to be really careful in areas where there's been no development, despite the fact that there is naturally a bit of movement of people in neighbouring communities. We just have to be really careful around that. There are kind of judgments that have to be made on that stuff. So it's all factored into the consideration. Like I say, there's not a sort of scientific formula that kind of tells you in the end yes or no. It is all part of the consideration and the criteria that we look at.
So if you're a village hall committee applying for grant funding, the village hall committee will not know where those users come from, because they let that hall out to 12 different organisations in that week. And it was those organisations that know where their customers come from, not the village hall committee. So they will not have that data. Councillor Porter made the point about the process. As you describe it, it is not the lived experience of applicants. So Byton Village Hall spoke to the officer.
That's the case there.
Yes, it took 3 months before they were told no. That could have, because they don't have any development in their parish. That could have been covered in that initial conversation, and it wasn't. That people are not being told quickly enough. So Trinity applied for funding, can't remember what it was for, heating system. The decision had been made, but they were not told for another 6 weeks. In that period, prices have gone up. You've produced, something that.
Okay, we're getting down into real weeds. I get it, and I think.
But we've been asked to speed up we've been asked to give a contribution to how we can make it better. Speed up the decision making, make it more transparent, and loosen the geographical boundaries. Find a way. Thank you.
Brilliant, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I think the thing that worries me is we finish up in April 28, whatever it is, with money still not spent. So I was thinking about the resilience strategy that we've considered at this committee, and we know that overheating, cool hubs, warm hubs, and so on, all have value, whether it's village halls or whatever. So I wonder within the marketing and the nudging and the supporting bit, we could point to the resilience strategy. I think there's a 15-point check plan in there or something, because I think that provides thoughts and ideas. Now, that's either for the parish council or village halls or communities to think about, the church, but also possibly for ourselves as a council. to draw up a shortlist of things that we may want to push forward on for SIL, not just the external parish council and so on. So I'd be interested to hear your views on that. And my other question was, structural change order will be with us in the autumn. What does that mean for levels and service and speed in terms of SIL spend and responses?
Okay.
In terms of structural change order, the advice we're waiting. We're seeking advice on the impact of that on SIL. The best estimate at the moment of legal colleagues is that SIL won't be affected by the structural change order, but it is one of those amongst, I think, quite a long list of things that we're waiting for external advice on, just so we can be more sure. But at the moment, we're expecting or hope, and we're expecting that won't constrain our ability to award SIL monies up to 2028. And in terms of the thinking around links into the resilience strategy, absolutely we can take that away. You know, I think one of the things that we set out in the slides is around trying to. We already have taken steps to improve our communication, our information about SIL, spreading the word, making people more aware of their opportunities with that. So absolutely, I think we're always looking for hooks to hang it on, and things that tie into, you know, appropriate other related strategies and related documents. So we can absolutely take that thought away. Thank you.
Councillor Toby Cooper.
I promise I won't do any debate and save time because it's a long question. Not a long question, but
I think we're probably need to debate.
Right, fine, we're in it, aren't we? We're in it. Firstly, really good idea from Councillor Lee. I think about the sort of, if the SIL panel actually pushes the sort of projects it wants to see that align with the council strategy for community groups and for us as councillors to know about, then actually that's going to really help direct and guide who we go to encourage SIL bids to come forward. And if such bids that are within our strategic aims as a council don't come forward, then as a council, why don't we just try and do it ourselves? But I think it has to have some sort of strategy and done fast, because Cheryl, you're absolutely right, it's got to be quick. And then good Councillor Porter's point around how hard it is as a community group to actually do this. It is quite hard, and I've don't be involved myself, but actually the officer team are excellent in terms of giving that sort of advice. But maybe we make that more explicit, that advice is available for small community groups, so they're not put off by the fact that they're having to do a long form, whatever else. They can phone an officer before they start filling that in as an offer would be really good. Something headlined about that. And a very quick question, which is a big pertinent issue in my ward at the moment, is when SIL bids are granted, come forward and approved, how shovel ready, I suppose, are those bids generally? Do they have to be completely fully costed and designed before they're approved, or can they be more in principle bids with the design and details to come later on?
I think the answer is they vary in terms of what we get forward. I have to say many of the community bids that come forward, community-led bids, are very well ready. They're generally in, well developed and in a good place. One of the criteria that we use, so part of our assessment is in terms of deliverability, and that touched on a number of areas in terms of the sort of the security of other necessary funding, permissions and things that might be required, experience of the organisation in terms of delivering projects. There's a number of things that are part of that, but that is one of the assessment criteria. So the more evidence there is of deliverability within good time frame, the more likely we are to support it, because that's one of our criteria. So
if I may just add there that where this is capital investment, we recognise that is more complex and that does take longer, and it does have more steps to it, like quotes and getting the permissions and licensing. So we do allow for that, and we do understand that there might be times that are needed within those community groups to seek all of that. But it does vary, as Steve said, as to how developed they are. But that's why in our grant agreements we do allow that period of further development, because sometimes people need assurance of the capital investment to go to the next stage. So we're mindful of that as well.
Councillor Ashwell.
Sorry, Chair. I'm just thinking how we can try and get this out to more people is through our parish councils. And could we perhaps put a link for them to put on their website or that way?
Yeah, we absolutely do target parish councils as a really key channel for doing this. I attended the parish briefing 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and did a sort of short item on just to make sure they were aware of the tweaks that we made to the process and the upcoming timescale. So they're one of the key channels. We can always look at ways to do more of that. So we do encourage them to do that. We encourage them to both think about bids that they might submit themselves, but also, like we do with our members, to think about organisations within their parish who they know or they might already be supporting. So we encourage them to kind of take both those roles as leaders in their community. So, but we can always, if there's more ideas, we can always pick those up.
Sorry, just one more than Chair. So obviously a lot of the parish councils have parish magazines still. I mean, could they be put something in there?
Absolutely. We encourage them to think about bids themselves, but also to just spread the word and using all those channels that they've got. So yeah, we do kind of encourage them to do that, as we would have all members, who know organisations and projects around their patch. So
I think we can definitely think though about, sometimes we talk in officer language, don't we, to external parish councils and community groups. And I think there's a piece there that I'm sensing that we can look at our communication style to think about how that is relatable for community groups and so forth. Sometimes we can talk through process, can't we? But it doesn't mean anything if you don't work in the sector. So we can certainly take that on board and think about the channels that we use and how we use them.
Chair, sorry, just one more thought then. Maybe it's a comms thing as well on our, Facebook page or whatever.
Okay, I'm just going to, because we've gone over time on this item, but if I could perhaps round this off by saying there's one thing that still worries me in all of this. That, so I'll take you back to my own ward. Six-figure sums have been spent in my ward outside the Winchester LPA area on projects put forward by quite large organisations. As I said, the Science Centre and the pavilion down in Chilcombe Sports Ground. If I had known that six-figure sums were in the running to be spent on those projects outside the Winchester LPA area, I could have come up with lots of parish organisations who would have used fractions of that money to achieve much greater effect for their own communities than they've been able to do. And I think that, as I say, that's focusing on a particular, but I think, and looking at the nods around the room, that goes for a lot of other people as well. We've lost the linkage in ward members having sight of all the organisations that are bidding for money out of the SILPOT, because large numbers of them are not just the community organisations, they're Hampshire, they are other large, the Science Centre is going to pay for attraction, for goodness sake. I know it's a charity as well, but we simply don't get sight of those larger bids that are going in. So we're therefore not in a position to give our own parishes and our own local voluntary organisations much of an idea of where they're going to stand in the pecking order of these things. Now, I just will leave that out there unless Councillor Bolton wants to come back.
Added in the principle that councillors should be the
just give visibility.
But the councillors should be, as of the last 12 months, I think we've said, councillors do have to start giving their awareness that it's actually going forward. So that's why it's really important to add that in to make sure the councillors get sight of those.
I'm sorry, Chairman, but that's just not happening.
No, it isn't. No. That's why I gave my example.
That's part of the reason. It's the responsibility of the applicant to get that support. That's the important thing.
The other way around. It's got to be the authority's responsibility to tell its ward members.
That's not how lots of other places happen. But I mean,
you're right. South Downs is just as bad.
Because on that actually, yeah, because it's an interesting point of whether we do it or whether the applicant does it. I think that's a very interesting point.
It's back to self-monitoring, isn't it? For things.
Just to add, I mean, the team do it for the small grants and town forum grants, I believe, where they email the grants that are coming through to members. So maybe it's just a simple adoption of that mechanism.
Just like to add my 5 pennies worth.
Go on,
We are underpowered in the parish rural community. We need the support and it's absolutely vital. We won't move forward otherwise.
I agree. Okay, thank you for all those really valuable points
Take the points
made
you've
there.
made. Reflect on those points you've made.
And I think that's been a really useful airing of the issue. And thank you for the slide deck that prompted all of that as well. Okay, we're very nearly there. Next item on the agenda is to look at the forward programme. And as I said, the main feature on that is 17th September session, which we will look to with bated breath. Any comments on that full programme?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Obviously, I haven't been on this committee before. We did mention before about the S106 agreement, which Whiteley has, and I've been chasing for information on that for maybe 7 months now from officers, and I'd like that possibly to be on this work programme.
Okay, can we have an email exchange afterwards to sort out exactly what we want answered on that? Thank you. Danny, quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to ask for clarification. So the Southern Water session, is that going to explicitly cover sewer capacity, storm overflows, full drainage constraints, climate resilience and growth assumptions, which are all interrelated? And hopefully we'll have multi-agency there, because what Southern Water on its own is just one entity amongst many others. And the other comment is, should the work programme also include a dedicated heat adaptation climate resilience item, not just water and flooding? Thank you.
On the first one, I think once I've had a bit of a break, so mid-August, I'll put something round to elicit your ideas on how we should structure that discussion, because I think the main thing is it needs to be a constructive discussion and not a let's bash Southern Water, because that would be absolutely pointless. And as I say, hope we have others there as well. So we'll cover that way. And the second point, whether we should have a climate related item, I think we've got to, well, in normal course, we would want to link that to a policy paper going forward through the system. We've largely established that there aren't going to be many more of those. What the point of that would be, other than having an open discussion, which may be of value itself.
I just give you some ideas. So, for example, in the recent heat climate that we've had, one fan's been sold every second, effectively going out a retail shop. Air conditioners are being bought. We're pushing heat from these air conditioners in urban areas into the street. We're increasing the load. We have a local area energy plan. The load on the grid is not going to be great going forward. We've got a health-ish aspect to that as well. Guidance and help on how people should.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done.
We'll have a chat on how we might tackle that going forward, because I get your point. Yeah. Anything else? If not, I think we've reached the end of the agenda. Thank you very much indeed. And it's still light.